Hey y'all, welcome back to the Jess and John pod. I'm
I
John.
am Jess. That's John. We're back in your feed this soon because we have a special guest, the man who released Luigi Mangione's Manifesto when the mainstream media wouldn't, independent journalist Ken Klippenstein. Ken, welcome to the show.
Hey guys, thanks for having me.
It's good to have Ken Klippenstein of Ken Klippenstein. You're known for your investigative journalism, your very popular newsletter, and the guerrilla marketing tactics on Twitter to promote that newsletter. Um, so right now we're in this crazy time where you've put out this manifesto, and the mainstream media is like gatekeeping it, almost unwilling to answer questions about why they haven't released it. What do you make of their approach there? Have they tried to get it from you yet?
Yeah, so my critique of these institutions is exactly that, the institutions, because I know good people in them, and these places are not monoliths. There is plenty of disagreement within it, and that's why I heard these stories from people within the institutions that were frustrated that they were not publishing, because, as was described to me, um, other journalists within these so there's two big reasons. One is that people talk to law enforcement, and then there becomes a source capture dynamic that develops where if a senior law enforcement official gives you this, then that person might make asks of you. In my view, if they're going to have all these conditions that you can't use it, don't use it. But that's not the view that a lot of these institutions have, that a lot of the reporters that come up in these kind of establishment media outlets develop, and they get to be very close with these sources, and so they observe stuff that they're asked of. And then the second point is fear that like some sort of Manchurian Candidate movie, people are just going to see this manifesto and be spurred to violent action, and there won't be any thought. You'll just, like a zombie, have to go out there and attack somebody, and you can't even help yourself. And I think, to me, that just sounds a lot like the 90s era attempts to ban violent video games, the idea that that's causing children to engage in violence or whatever. I'm very skeptical of all of that. But setting that aside, is it the media's job to suborn itself to this kind of national security system? I mean, we have law enforcement agencies who are supposed to do that. Is the media supposed to deputize itself as part of the security system? I don't think so. And so that's in part why I publish it. The third point was the overwhelming public interest in this. I mean, these media organizations, when they explain why they don't publish it, they always hide behind, oh, it wasn't really newsworthy, we can just paraphrase it instead. It was absolutely newsworthy. I mean, I can tell you right now, something like 2 million people have viewed it, and it's just on my newsletter. I mean, I can't think of a better um, sign that huge numbers of Americans are interested in this kind of thing. And it's just a fundamental misread. Of course, the press doesn't care because they can look at it. This is circulating not just among specific national security reporters, but they were all kind of sharing it with each other. And I was kind of like, wait, you guys are all looking at this. Why are you not worried about yourselves having the Manchurian Candidate effect and going into violence? But suddenly the public, you have to worry about that. Like, what? So I was very skeptical of all of the arguments against it. And that's ultimately why I chose to release it.
I remember you said something to the effect of you didn't put it out at first because you thought it might be fake. Do you still think that's possible?
No, I never thought that document was fake. When
Okay.
there was a separate one, I think a day or two prior, that was circulating from a Substack that so many people were sharing. I can't remember what the title of it was, but I ran that by people that I would know in the law enforcement space. I'll say that not everyone in law enforcement has these ridiculous constraints and things. Just like I was saying about news media not being monoliths, law enforcement agencies also are not monoliths. And so I was able to run that by them, and they told me that it was false, that was not real. So then it was one of the funny parts of reporting this. Initially, people were like, wait, you mean the thing that everyone's been posting already? It took a while for people to realize that what I was publishing was different than the thing that had been making the rounds in the media. And that's another reason why it's important not to withhold this stuff. They could have prevented this misperception on the part of millions of people that they're getting from this made up version because they haven't been given the real one in the first place. So that whole fear that people are going to see something that could spur them to action, that's already happening in the form of a fake one that wasn't actually real.
I want to get something else straight because I've heard that this was found on him in a notebook in his backpack and was handwritten. Is that the case? Is there a chance it could be planted in that case? Because he did upload some handwritten notes on Goodreads. I don't know if you've seen them, but we could see if it matches. But is it true that this was something handwritten found on his person?
Yes, that's my understanding. And there's going to be confusion because, again, the lack of transparency causes people to get confused because you don't know what they're quoting from. They're not always clear about what it is because they haven't put it out there. That's exactly the problem with this mentality of we're going to, trust us journalism, I call it, where you can just believe us that we're going to paraphrase these things correctly. Which, by the way, Jordan Ewell pointed out, there was a CNN clip where they were saying this guy makes this individual look crazy. We're not going to tell you what exactly it said, but you can just trust us that when you read this, you realize these are the rantings of a madman. They said almost exactly that. And it's like you read it. I mean, you can certainly disagree with murder, as I do. But to read this and say that there isn't some kind of a cogent person there that's thinking through issues and has some kind of a view, it's not just unfair, it's just a smear. It's not an accurate reflection of the contents of the thing. And nobody could push back because they didn't have the contents of the document. But to answer your question, yes, that is the current understanding that law enforcement took it from his notebook. But as you said, he's written a bunch of things, and that's one of the reasons it's nice to have an open public record of these things so we can know what we're even referring to instead of bumping into each other and tripping over all these different references that we have.
Yeah, so the suspect has a digital footprint, like everybody these days. He's 26. When you're reading through those Goodreads reviews, does it seem like similar concepts, similar writing to what you saw in the manifesto?
Oh yeah, and when I saw the fake one, I immediately thought, okay, well, I actually thought the fake one was pretty well written, but it didn't seem to cohere with the voice that you identified. I also published, this got less attention. I also published his resume, which someone gave me, who had been given it in the course of his application for jobs. And so a sort of tone or voice emerges. And I saw the fake one as kind of this cartoon image of maybe what someone would picture this jokerfied, angry young man would be, but it didn't fit with the tone of the other documents. And I said early on, before I got the real one, I said I thought that this was fake because it just didn't seem to match up.
Yeah, of course, it seems to be a lot of construction happening from all corners of the internet. Then you have everything that we've talked about so far. Then you have his lawyer saying that he's seen no evidence suggesting that he would be the killer, but it seems to be pushing for a not guilty plea. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, that was kind of a twist that I certainly wasn't expecting, because they've, according to the law enforcement, and this is something that we're going to have to go over and be skeptical of, just like anything else. That's why we say alleged, because we're relying so much on law enforcement's picture, which, by the way, they're trying to paint by withholding this document, because that empowers the media then to tell you, trust us, here's what it says. You don't actually have to see it. So there's an adversarial game, and that's, to some extent, that's their job. They're supposed to try to get the prosecution. But the public is operating at a disadvantage when the media doesn't do its own job, which is not supposed to be the same as law enforcement's and trying to paint a certain picture. But anyhow, what his lawyer said was that, yes, he's going to try to plead not guilty. And that seems like it's going to be hard if what the law enforcement is saying is true, given the amount of evidence. And he's disputed parts of it. He said that cash found on his person, it's very interesting. He said cash found on his person was not actually his, and kind of insinuates that was planted on him. And I saw a couple of lawyers on Twitter speculating that that's pretty unusual to see a very specific point of dispute on something that's not particularly probably at the top of his list of legal concerns right now, the money. So that's an interesting question itself. But the reality is, something like this, there's so much fog of war. And again, we're operating in sort of law enforcement's turf because of that relationship between media and law enforcement. The information that's going to come to you is really going to be skewed in their favor in all sorts of different ways. So I would encourage people to just exercise some healthy skepticism until things reach an adversarial court setting where the suspect is actually able to defend himself.
Yeah, I have seen so many posts about jury nullification, and that even if the judge instructs you, if you have X, Y, and Z evidence and these cases are met, then you find this person guilty. But actually, it's something that people don't really talk about. But if you're on a jury and you believe in your heart of hearts that this person should not be found guilty, despite all of the statutes, you can put in a not guilty verdict. Do you think there's a chance that Luigi Mangione's attorney and maybe Luigi Mangione thinks that the public will sympathize with his cause enough to sort of throw this case and make sure he gets a not guilty verdict?
Well, I would say one of the reasons I wouldn't make a very good cable news personality is because I don't really wander into territory that I don't know much about. And I don't know much about, court dynamics and things. I mean, I will say that his lawyer had put out a statement saying, please stop offering us money, or he said something like that, which gives you a sense of the outpouring of sympathy on the part of the company. And certainly within people even that I've interviewed a bunch that work for or worked for United Health Group, the insurance company, who themselves expressed sympathy for the shooter. These are people that were on calls and things with the former CEO. So it's a very unusual dynamic, and for that reason, I'm uncomfortable making any sort of prognostication about what might happen. But I think it's safe to say that there's a lot of public, complicated public sentiment and even sympathy for Luigi.
Yeah, I think good journalists typically don't make good cable news personalities.
Maybe that's the real question,
Somebody was just making fun of me. They were like, you have so many qualifiers. You're like, it seems like, or you're like, just come out and say it. And I was thinking to myself, and it's kind of like, I see where he's coming from, but it's like, I would also be a bad reporter if I wasn't trying to be specific about things, right? Or maybe I could be one of these reporters that says, oh, trust me, this is what the document says, and it's all wrong. And it's apparently you can get quite far with that, but I don't know how I'd look myself in the mirror.
All the way to the New York Times, I guess. So we've been talking so far about Luigi Mangione, but I'm wondering if you can talk about the lawsuit that Brian Thompson was facing. It appears to be unrelated to the suspect, but I'm asking to get a clearer picture about how executives operate. Can you talk about that lawsuit?
Right. So former CEO Brian Thompson was sued by the Hollywood Firefighters Pension Fund. I believe it was in January, earlier this year, I think. And what they alleged was that he had engaged in insider trading and fraud that ended up hurting, obviously, their investment fund, because this is like the retirement portfolio for like public servants, firefighters. So, if there's insider trading and that person benefits from it, then it ends up hurting the stock. So the context of it, I'm trying to remember what it was. There was a Justice Department antitrust investigation into the company, which is interesting background now, because you see Elizabeth Warren introduce legislation with Josh Hawley, bipartisan legislation, to break up these companies because they agree with the Justice Department's assessment that there's way too much concentrated sort of monopoly power in them. But the lawsuit alleged that the former CEO had knowledge of this Justice Department investigation and did not disclose it to the public or even investors, which is, and in addition to that, sold a large sum, I think it was something like $15 million of personally held stock in the company prior to its being made public. And then once it was made public, it just wiped out, I want to say it was like billions worth of stock market value. And obviously that just soaks the retirees that don't have this inside knowledge to trade on or not, participating in that. And so that's sort of what the allegation, that's what the allegation was.
I don't know if you've slept at all this week because we've got the Manifesto. You've been reporting on all of these leaks from United Healthcare and Brian Thompson. I want to go to the United Healthcare stuff. There was this initial memo that was leaked. Basically, they told employees to shut up. You got this leaked memo. You talked to some employees. Let's first talk about that. And then you've just tweeted another memo from internal United Healthcare communications. But I want to ask about the first one. Tell us about that.
One of the themes of their messaging very early on, I would say the dominant theme, has been, please do not talk to the press. There's no reason to, there's no benefit to it. And this is repeated. It wasn't just in one memo from the CEO. This was in talking points that were circulated to people in the call centers, even about how they're supposed to interact with people, and encourage them to push back on criticisms of the deceased CEO. Say that, we all think he's very North Korean kind of language, like say that we all think he's great and he's perfect and everything. But there's one group you're not supposed to talk to, and that was members of the news media. In that case, you're supposed to refer them to their communications department, which in my own experience of offering them opportunities to comment, they never respond. So if what they're doing is trying to get their side of the story out, they're not doing a very good job of it, because they haven't responded to any of my queries. I've hardly seen any comment in media besides boilerplate sort of stuff, but they're doing just what I was saying the cops are doing before, where they're trying to control the narrative and how this unfolds. Fortunately, many of the workers don't trust their communications department to convey anything accurately or fairly. So they have been providing me a sense of what's been going on. And it's almost, I get this schizophrenic sense because I watch cable news and I see them talking about it, and just this, I understand for anybody who's killed, the outpouring of sympathy, but to talk about this and say everyone loved, he was well liked. That was how the New York Times reported it, or I think it was the Post. They said he was well liked and a father and all this great stuff. And then you talk to the rank and file, you get a very different picture. I'm not even saying the media is lying. My guess is they're talking to other executives who are probably saying these things, but that's the fundamental problem. We're seeing so many of the flaws with the media system as it exists because they talk to leadership. They don't talk to, I'm not even talking people in the call centers. I'm talking to people in management that are kind of in the middle. They don't even talk to those guys. They will only talk to the C-suite, these media outlets. I'm not even saying don't do that, but if that's all you do, look at it this way. If you want to understand what it's like to work at Amazon, are you going to talk to Jeff Bezos or are you going to talk to somebody at a fulfillment center who's going to give you a better picture, a more accurate picture of what an ordinary average person there's life is like? And they just don't do that. The media doesn't do that.
Do you feel like because you're independent now, you have a better shot at covering all of this? Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. Because I can then write for ordinary people. I mean, our business model, everyone gives us $10 a month and that's it. I'm not getting anything else. There's no kind of like foundation money or rich people laundering stuff through nonprofits to give us. It's just $10. And that audience, they're curious what other people like them, what their experience of the company is like. I mean, on the other hand, if you're doing watch TV commercials. Next time your parents, if they still have cable, that's the only way I see a lot of cable. Next time they're watching like MSNBC or something, watch the commercials and notice how expensive this stuff they advertise is for. These are not for average everyday Americans. A lot of this stuff is for a certain type of affluent person who's like Washington News. So much of that is for staffers that then go and tell their boss what happened. It's not written forget about someone in, Wisconsin like me. It's not even written for kind of ordinary people in major cities. It's for specifically the Washington set and maybe some people in New York City. So it's like deeply, deeply out of touch. And I always stress this point. I don't think they're trying to lie. I think they just are writing. They're not writing for you. Look at the New York Times. Go look at the advertisements for it. It's these tennis bracelets that are the equivalent of like, a huge portion of what I make in a year. And like you can get a sense from the advertising, who is this for? I'm selling my thing for $10 a month. I hope that most people can afford that. Certainly more people can afford that can afford like a Jaguar. I mean, just look at the ads. It's crazy. This stuff is not for you.
This would be a really bad time to lift up my wrist and have a tennis bracelet on it right now from the New York Times. So, I'm glad we're talking about this media ecosystem that is, presenting us with all this information. I know you talked a lot about sanctioned news when you published a dossier on J.D. Vance.
Right.
Could you tell us about that concept and tell us about the overlaps that you learned, about sanctioned news from that story and the media response to it, also compared to this one?
Yeah, all leaks are not created equally. I draw a distinction between sanctioned leaks. These are like officially authorized leaks. And in fact, the Justice Department, the intelligence community does this too. They have the authority under the president to leak even in some cases sensitive information. In that it's a word, you can look this up. It's called authorized disclosures. What's distinct from those is what's called unauthorized disclosures. One of them you can go to jail for if it's classified information. The other one, nothing happens. And so in the process of shaping these narratives, it can disclose things to the press, declassify things, release things. But very often, since those are designed to advance the interests of the group, not just the White House or the intelligence community, right down to a local sheriff. He wants to win an election again. So he's going to disclose certain things. Again, not necessarily lying, but you can tell a misleading story by selectively cherry picking pieces of information that will lead someone to draw a conclusion that they wouldn't have drawn if they saw everything. And I think that's what's happened with the Vance story too. I'm glad you brought that up because there's a through line from this story to that one, which is that the media again said, trust us. We're going to paraphrase this and we basically know what it is. What's the big deal? We told you kind of what's in there. It's nothing interesting. Another story that I would say, look at the number of people that read it and tell them that there's no one interested in this and it's not newsworthy. Then I don't remember how many it was, but it was a ton of people were interested in the story. And when you actually went through it, it was very different than their paraphrase of what it says. Not even necessarily because they're being misleading, but because a Washington journalist, or, it's concentrated in New York City and in Washington, D.C., even if they're trying their best to tell you the truth, picture somebody with, a different class background than you, a different social set. They're going to think what's interesting is different than someone like you are. So even if they're trying their best, they're not going to be able to tell people what's interesting. So they just shouldn't. And you should just put it out there and let people decide for themselves. Sure, include a guide or something, help them walk through it. But if all you're doing is the paraphrase, you're leaving a lot of information out, which I think we saw, obviously not just with this manifesto, but with the Vance dossier. And that was a sort of ridiculous case because it was all publicly verifiable. It was not the Steele dossier. It wasn't all of these salacious claims about someone's sex life or whatever that you can't even prove, which, by the way, the media published in the case of this, which was literally just a list of the campaign's perceived political liabilities with regard to specific positions he's taken and things he said. So these are votes. These are comments and interviews that you could look up. That's why I was perfectly comfortable and slept like a baby publishing it, because I don't have to worry about any of it being untrue. It was all very, and anyone could go up there and look. What was interesting was the metatextual point of why did they pick these to consider as liabilities? Because some of the things he said and did made sense, and they consider that a liability, and so that was interesting in itself. But to me, I mean, there are edge cases in journalism for sure, but neither one of these made me uncomfortable at all. And I was sort of shocked that it was as big of an issue as it was.
Yeah, the intentional leaks are always the most boring information none of us want to hear. The CIA redacts parts of the document because that's just the boring stuff. They're just saving you time. You don't have to read any of that. You can just ignore it. So I have seen the Twitter feed. I mean, some people are taking bigger risks than you or I on there, Ken, but I noticed you were getting some back and forth. Some people like, oh, like you're celebrating the United Healthcare killer, things to that effect, that covering this has some impact on the discourse that's negative. Tell us about, what people are saying. Are people mad at you, Ken?
Oh, yeah. I mean, on Twitter, I find that in real life, and I'm curious if you guys see this too. Do you have like ordinary everyday friends that are like, take surprisingly sort of radical positions about this? You're like, wait, what?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah, Wheeling, West Virginia is a hotbed of radicals, Ken. I don't know if you know this.
And I'm in Waverly, Iowa, and it's remarkable. Yeah, the standard person policing the language on Twitter about this is so out of touch with the average person.
And these were people during the election. I did a story on this. I looked at the convention speeches of both Trump and Harris. Between the two of them, I think they mentioned healthcare once or twice. And, I complained about that because I guess just on a personal level, I think it's outrageous. And I was told, well, people are not motivated by this. Literally everyone is talking that I know has brought this up. Like it's just this rage. A month ago, they were like, yeah, I was just not on the agenda this time. People were more interested in other things.
Well, I think that's kind of the sanctioned news effect happening right there. It's like, oh, people don't care about this because you're sanctioning, you're the arbiter of what they care about. And then this happens and it just kind of pulls the mask off. Totally.
Clearly, people are, maybe they're not interested in your, we're going to increase Medicaid. We're going to do like a 2% health savings account or something. Maybe the mealy picking on the edges people aren't interested, but they're clearly interested in the substance of the healthcare system.
We've seen that he got into some kind of surfing accident. He was living in Honolulu and had back issues. Do you know any more about this experience he's had with the healthcare system with that?
Yeah, so reportedly it affected him so seriously that he was not able to be intimate in the context of relationships. He ended up getting surgery, and I know a little bit about back surgery. Apparently there's a great degree of risk involved in it. It doesn't always turn out well. And I think he was just suffering debilitating pain. And that was kind of the turning point, it sounds like, because what's amazing about the shooter, think of your word, try to picture who do you picture when you think of a shooter? You think of someone sort of antisocial and like off-putting, poorly so, and this guy is like, by all accounts, I can't find anyone saying prior to the decline of his health that he wasn't just like somebody that everyone liked, or at the very least, like not someone that you had any sort of issues with. He sounded like, outgoing, and people described him as friendly. Even in the pictures of him, he was smiling at somebody. What was it? Like
We've seen him.
Yeah. So it's like, this guy doesn't really fit the whole incel, like Trump shooter kind of thing. Like he's the opposite of that in a way that it's like, I wonder if there's even any precedent for it. I can't think of anything. Anyhow, so
I don't know, Ken. He was playing Among Us, a very violent video game.
Isn't that the best?
He was a killer.
Listen, we all gave Tipper Gore way too much shit. If we would have cut this off back in the 90s, we could maintain our for-profit healthcare system.
Yeah, exactly. It's the same thing. You just scapegoat something instead of dealing with the substantive issue, whether it's video games, or what are they going to say with this? They're trying to say that because he came from a rich family, that means it's not a class. This isn't a class story. Well, I have news for you. You can have a lot of money and still not be able to afford the $10 million surgery or whatever it is. Like if you don't think that's how the healthcare system works, you don't live here. And the fact that people are saying that is just like so out of touch,
Mm.
Yeah, I almost feel like, if you have money and you run into a situation with the healthcare system where you're really on the wrong side of it, that might even push you. We're into speculation here. It's just that it's so bad that even somebody from a privileged background can look at this and say, even I can't deal with this. Why are we putting up with it?
Yeah. I mean, I can think of
Elizabeth
my own
Warren.
friends. I know I have upper middle class friends that are afraid of their health insurance. Like I think everyone does. I mean, it's just the fact that these cable anchors are trying to cast it that way. It's like, man, you must have a lot of money if you're able to say that this is like a non-issue unless you're poor,
Yeah, absolutely. Like so many people who, I don't know, identify as rich, feel rich because they have a big fancy car, a nice house, have negative money, right?
Yeah.
Some of it could be medical debt. It's super common. Today I want to bring up Elizabeth Warren's comment. She was asked about this by Joy Reid. She said, violence is never the answer, but you can only push people so far, and then they start to take matters into their own hands. What happens when you turn this into the billionaires run it all is they get the opportunity to squeeze every last penny. Do you think, Ken, anything's going to come out of this discourse that we're having now about how bad our healthcare system is?
Well, legislation just did. More did than at any point during an election, that's for sure. And bipartisan legislation. That's interesting that Hawley's throwing down on this. And I think a lot depends. I always make this point because of free will. You can't make the same prognostications about things that you could in physics. This molecule moved this way, that moved that way. A lot depends on how people try to talk about this in a way that's constructive. I mean, the view that talking about healthcare is some kind of nihilistic thing, to me, that's the most constructive thing we can take out of this. What the people on the cable shows, they're like, oh, we just have to say, oh, this was so sad. Oh, well, that's the most nihilistic view, is that this just came out of nowhere and there's nothing you can do. That's like deeply nihilistic. I think the most hopeful way you can respond to it is let's improve the system so that someone else won't find himself under duress, like this individual, supposedly did.
Right. I have a question. Here we are talking about what's going to come out of this. We've got antitrust. Politics is here making weird bedfellows again with Elizabeth Warren and Josh Hawley talking about antitrust. What do you make of the shifting politics that's giving us, Josh Hawley talking about antitrust, or the Trump administration picking one of the three Republicans that support the PRO Act as a labor secretary? What are we seeing with Republicans, and how seriously should we take that?
I think it's important because something like that has to happen. Otherwise, one party, in this case, the Democrats, is going to have to get a supermajority. And that's sort of the framework we've been taught is, oh, you've got to get, 60 votes in the Senate to pass anything. That's insane. That happens once every 50 years. So unless you're going to do that, which would be interesting, but when does that happen? Once, twice a century. The only other way is you're going to have to peel off some Republicans. And that makes, I've noticed that makes a lot of liberals uncomfortable, but I don't see any other solution if you're going to approach anything legislatively. And that doesn't mean that you have to come to these things in a naive way. You criticize them when they don't follow through on what they say they're going to do. But the other side of that is if there's no political upshot for them to supporting these things, then why are they going to support them? So it's like, I've always just tried to say, good that he did that. And then I invariably get hit with all these replies. Why are you pro so-and-so? No, I'm pro that issue getting some kind of a bipartisan character to it, because that's the only way we're going to move forward here. You can't get 60 votes, or, not with these candidates that you're willing to run. If you're going to run these guys that could barely squeak across the finish line, you're going to have to work with some of these Republicans to be able to pass anything. I don't see another Obama sitting in the wings to come in with a supermajority. And when he did, he didn't even do anything with it anyway. So what do you expect?
Kind of the rub.
Yeah.
And now we're in this situation with healthcare, Ken.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Full circle. Ken, what do you have working on now? What can people expect to find on Ken Klippenstein, the Substack?
I'm going to be substantiating a little more the media breakdown in telling people the whole truth about what's happening. Because as I said before, there are a lot of people at these outlets that are frustrated. They're not monoliths. Just because, management has total control and final say over everything, but that doesn't mean that everyone in the rank and file, the same way I'm talking to the rank and file of these health insurance companies, aren't upset and sympathetic to all the stuff that we're talking about here and wish that things could look differently. So I'm going to try to map out for people based on the accounts being provided to me how a media failure like this happens, because things are getting worse. They used to publish manifestos. They have in the past. They used to be more actively pro disclosure. Do you remember during the WikiLeaks disclosures? They would publish stuff on that. I'm not saying that it was perfect by any means, but I'm saying it's gotten a lot worse. And because of I think partisan polarization and the effect that that's had on discourse around open association and free speech, people are uncomfortable about it. But I think it's time to talk about this in a way that is not, partisan like that. And it's just something that everybody could benefit from if the media would just put stuff out there more. I'm not saying it's like the government coming in and stopping them, but it's this subtle relationship that they have, like I was saying before, with these national security institutions that ends up them being captured and not willing to say things, or in hock to these kind of, very trendy cultural ideas like, oh, if you're posting this, it's stochastic terrorism to post a picture. They have any number of reasons that they get blackmailed out of disclosing stuff that they all know and they're all openly sharing with each other. It wasn't just national security reporters that had this document. They were all chatting with it. So they're fine with them knowing. Somehow they're immune from becoming a mass shooter and being motivated by this stuff. It's the rest of everyone else that is going to have the Manchurian candidate freak out and go crazy. So
we were never as concerned about this moral hazard with the bank bailout or anything major like that either.
Exactly. It's gotten worse. So that's what I'm going to try to map out and show people that, because it's so gradual that I think that people don't even notice it.
Have you considered, Ken, that maybe they're just really smart, like superior intelligence to us, maybe?
Well, I might have said that when I was in the mainstream media like a couple months ago, but now that I'm out, then I'm a firm no on that. I don't think that's the case.
Yes, everyone I met in the Ivy League was, most of them not as smart as people outside. But they keep calling our shooter ex-Ivy League student instead of Ivy League educated, Ivy League graduated.
Yeah, what is it?
Just castaway. Thank you so much for talking with us, Ken. This has been really great. Our first guest on the Jess and John pod also.
Big time.
How exciting.
Big,
we break the champagne over the maiden voyage, huh?
Yes.
That's exciting.
Yes. Well, thanks for coming on. We really appreciate it. Everyone follow Ken Klippenstein at Ken Klippenstein, and we will see you all next time.
Thanks, everybody.